Thank you for joining. In the wake of George Floyd and ugly incidents at Penn State and elsewhere, the need for real and tangible change has never been more critical. The initiatives I announced a few weeks ago are designed to accomplish 7 critical goals: critically review the student code of conduct, address community concern and anxieties about law enforcement personnel, training, and practices. We want our community to have a level of trust, and we hope to minimize anxious or afraid feelings. Recognize and address issues of mental health and well-being associated with problems of structural racism and prejudice. Establish a select presidential commission to provide institutional priority and longevity for this topic as a high-order priority. Partner with the Faculty Senate, recognizing shared governance and the need for the Faculty Senate to carry through these efforts. Work with the Board of Trustees to hold the President and leadership accountable for change. It is important to me that these new initiatives be guided by wide faculty and student participation and co-chairs representing independence and integrity. There is no administrative agenda other than to share the goals for these critical efforts. In addition to hearing from me today, you will hear from the co-chairs of the Select Presidential Commission on Racism, Bias, and Community Safety, a trustee who will chair the first oversight group on racism, bias, and community safety, and from our Vice Provost for Educational Equity. I'm so pleased at the thoughts and suggestions already shared with the co-chairs. As there are so many that want to contribute, we have set up a website to track progress and would ask that you now submit your suggestions and nominations directly to the site, which we have named Action Together. The co-chairs will be updating this site on progress of their efforts. As we work on the critical goals that I have outlined, there are some areas which have universal support, and that is the financial success of our students. So today I would like to announce the creation of the George Floyd Memorial Scholarship in Educational Equity, which has been endowed by the university with a $50,000 commitment. The university has also committed an additional $50,000 from these funds to the Osagie Osage Memorial Scholarship for Educational Equity. And we are announcing a matching fund for diversity and equity scholarships to help create a more diverse Penn State. We are launching this, and the university will be matching $10 million as an incentive to donor. I would now like to turn to critical members of our community to share what experiences, personal and professional, will help guide their approach and the qualities each are looking for in committee members and the university community participation as a part of commitment to drive real change. So the first question is, what does it mean to the Penn State community to have each of you in this role? And I'll begin with Danielle.
Thank you, President Barron, and I very much appreciate being joined by my colleagues who are on the commission and also who represent the trustees. So in response to your question, the reason this is a critical engagement, long-term engagement for me is because I represent a profession that has long reified inequality. I want to be a part of change, not just in the legal profession, but in how we prepare our next generation of service providers to recognize inequity and to act against it. So one of the real concerns that I have, which moved me to respond yes to you, is that I want to honor the past and those who fought for racial equality. I also want to recognize those who are in the present demanding real change, but most important, I want to prepare pathways for those who are our future so that we actually can eradicate the scourge that is racism, that is bias, and in your most eloquent identification, create communities that are safe. Safe for learning, safe for living, safe for progressing. And the law has a significant obligation to bring this about. The rule of law, often as it's implemented, does not account for the most vulnerable among us. Well, that has to cease. And that is why I join you in this effort.
Thank you. And Clarence, if you don't mind, I would like to ask you the same question.
So let me echo my thanks, President Barron, for asking me to serve. And like my colleague, I look forward to working with the other members, leadership of this commission. I'll keep my response very simple because I think the importance here will be the work. As I think about issues of equity and inclusion, these have been animating principles for me since I was an undergraduate and involved in student politics at my alma mater. These are principles that have animated me as I went through graduate school, became a faculty member, a department chair, and then moved into university level leadership. So in that sense, the work of this commission as it's been projected is consistent with that. But aside from the circumstances of my own personal biography, I do think that, well, I don't think, but as I think about the College of the Liberal Arts here at Penn State and how that exists as a very key space for the study in terms of research, in terms of teaching, of matters having to do with social difference, social inequality, and social change, as I think about the work that happens in that particular space. And certainly, I want to act in accordance with the principles of the liberal arts more generally in terms of playing a role and creating an environment, certainly at Penn State, but hopefully more broadly, that allows everyone, and certainly people of color and other minoritized groups, and African Americans within that, to be clear, to develop into their fullest selves and have opportunities to do so in this space and as they move on and have, I hope, meaningful lives and careers. So I'm very, very happy, very motivated to be part of this, and I look forward to this commission doing the work that has been brought into being to do. And thank you again for the invitation to participate.
And thank you, Clarence. And Beth, if I could now ask you the same question.
Thank you, Dr. Barron. I too am honored to co-chair the special commission with my colleagues, Deans Conway and Lang. I'm currently the chair of the University Faculty Senate, a body that's elected by the faculty from across the university to represent the university, them at the university level. I think it's important that faculty are represented in a leadership role on the Select Commission, and I'm proud to serve in this role. The Senate includes also a very strong student voice as elected members and creates a forum for faculty, staff, students, and administrators to discuss a wide variety of topics of interest to the university community. And I've been a strong advocate for faculty, staff, and student interests, including listening to, understanding, and fighting for minoritized communities. In both my personal and professional life, I've been an advocate for social and racial justice and recognizing and fighting against bias in society. Professionally, my teaching, research, and service is focused on identifying and recognizing bias and discrimination. I've been teaching at Penn State Altoona since 2002 and have taught a wide range of courses in my various disciplines from anthropology, communications, history, to women's gender and sexuality studies. Most of my classes are focused on social and racial justice and exploring bias from a historical perspective. And these classes cover a broad range of topics from Native American history to Middle East history, film and media studies, women's gender and sexuality studies. My research also aligns with my teaching and focuses on popular culture and representations of power and inequality in the US, Egypt, and Australia. I'm also actively involved in service outside of my work for the Senate and related to this topic. And for example, I'm currently a member of the President's Commission for Equity, the Commission for Women, and at Penn State Altoona, I'm on the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. And then personally, I've been involved in organizing against systems of oppression, including, I'm old enough, fighting against apartheid, supporting the women's movements, the LGBTQ movements, fighting against anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and the fight for racial justice, including supporting Black Lives Matter. So I'm really committed to this work, and I bring this kind of commitment to this commission. It's vitally important work if we're to build a more just and supportive institution for all of our faculty, staff, and students. So I really appreciate the opportunity.
Well, I want to make sure I thank the three of you personally, because I trust and believe that you're going to come up with a lot of suggestions and areas that we can take action and implement and make a difference for Penn State and I think beyond. Marcus, now I would like to turn to you as Vice President of Educational Equity. Perhaps you could describe why this work is so important to you, even though it might be obvious by the title of your program.
Thank you, Dr. Barron. So I think the work of educational equity is important in many ways. This work is really about education, educating everyone about the importance of one community. And it's about equity, the quality of being fair and impartial. Just for example, less than 40 years ago, veterans didn't receive the same type of support and appreciation for their service as they do now. In the mid-1990s saw some improvements in healthcare for veterans, and programs like Chapter 33 or the post 9/11 GI Bill and the Yellow Ribbon Program helped to provide better educational benefits for our veterans. And next month, for example, we will celebrate 30 years of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which provide and prohibits discrimination and guarantees that people with disabilities have the same opportunities as everyone else. Now, there's still a lot to be done to enhance this work, particularly around gender equity, LGBTQ equity, religion, socioeconomics, and other areas. But there's clearly one area that we need to work on the most, and that's racial equity. The current national climate has brought about some unfortunate situations that's been around for some time now, but it also brought some important attention to this work, because racial equity attempts to challenge systemic racism, white supremacy, and it recognizes when you hear the phrase Black Lives Matter, it means Black people in particular want to feel safe and treated fairly without bias or discrimination. But as a Research One university, I think we should follow the research on the benefits of racial diversity, because the research is very clear that racial diversity improves everyone's sense of belonging. It improves everyone's cognitive development. It helps prepare individuals to become better national and global citizens. And it can break down stereotypes and promote greater understanding. And so those are just some of the challenges and some of the reasons why I think this work is so important. Thank you for that question.
Thank you, Marcus. And Brandon, now I would like to turn to you. And I had the honor of listening to you as you convinced your fellow board members that it was extremely important to have the board have direct interest and oversight into what the select commission is doing, and the other objectives. And so perhaps you could give us a board perspective on what we're working on.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Barron. Before I begin, I'd like to thank all the panelists, the entire administration, and everyone who's dialed into this call for giving their time, talent, and energy to fight racism. It's through your commitment and long-term support can we cure the ill of systemic racism. As a person of color, I can understand why people are skeptical when we say we're forming a committee to fight racism. In the past, we received lip service and some broken promises. But I had an opportunity to get to know President Barron, who was a part of the civil rights movement. And I know that the issue of race and equality is important to him on a personal level. I can also assure you that the administration, my committee, and the board are not about lip service. We're about results that are going to make the lives of not only African-American Penn Staters, but all Penn Staters better. So when we talk about issues of race, it's about acknowledging that there's a problem, being open to change, and holding each other accountable. By virtue of having this discussion, the administration has shown that they're open for change. And it's my committee's job and the board's job to hold them accountable. The first point, though, that I want to discuss is the first point in that 3 point is acknowledging that there's a problem. There are a lot of people out there that don't really understand systemic racism. Even people that are out there protesting and supporting the cause, they don't fully understand it. And there's far too many people who don't even believe it exists. Racism is deeply rooted in our country, and it's going to take a long-term effort to solve this problem. And we need to have our leaders not only believe that it's real, but truly understand it to bring about the change necessary to move our country forward. It's my observation that a lot of organizations have responded to external factors. They've responded to protests or civil unrest, which is great. It is progress. But what that is sometimes is tantamount to responding to the symptoms without addressing the core underlying illness of systemic racism. When I say that a lot of people don't get systemic racism, it's not an insult. Actually, it's far from an insult. How can I or anyone else expect someone to understand a concept that they haven't experienced themselves or that no one has ever explained to them? That's why it's our duty, as minorities and our duty as white Penn Staters who do understand to share our stories, to make them see that the problem is real, to make them understand that there are structural barriers in place for people of color that white Americans do not have to deal with. I believe that the leadership of any organization sets the tone. So I thought that I would take some time and share some stories with you. And these stories are about my interaction with police. And before I begin, I want you to understand that I believe that the vast majority of police officers protect and serve with honor. But what the majority of those good cops are guilty of is turning a blind eye to the police that serve dishonorably. So I'm 14 years old, and it's a summer afternoon, and I'm walking home from my friend's house like I did every day that summer. And 2 police cars pull up and cut me off. And a cop jumps out and says, "Get the F on the ground," and pulls his gun. And I'm standing there in shock. And the cop walks over to me because I don't know what's happening. He walks over to me, puts the gun to my head and says, "I said, get on the effing ground." So I get on the ground and put my face is in the mud. They put their knee in my back and handcuff me and throw me in the back of the car. Mind you, I'm 14 years old. There's mud on my face. There are tears rolling down my eyes because I have no idea what's happening. Sometime later, the police officer comes back And he takes the handcuffs off and lets me out of the car and say, I'm sorry, you fit the description of somebody that was involved in a robbery. Have a nice day. Have a nice day. They just put a gun to a 14-year-old kid's head, threw him in the mud and threw him in the back of the car with no recourse. So circa 2006, we'll roll forward. It's New Year's Eve, and I'm living my dream as, in the NFL as a member of the New York Giants. My wife, then girlfriend, and I are headed out to a gala. I'm in a tuxedo, she's in a gown. Earlier that year, my wife had experienced some health issues, and I thought that I was going to lose her, but she recovered, she was healthy. So after this event, we're walking home, and my wife starts to experience some of the symptoms that she had when she was really sick, and I get scared. And I see a New York City police car, and it says on the back to protect and serve. Now, mind you, that I was a New York Giant and lived through 9/11. And I've done a lot of work with police, public service announcements, speaking at police events. I still have an NYPD hat on my shelf here in my house. So I walk up to the police officer and say, can you please help me? My wife is sick. I don't know whether she needs to see a paramedic, but just please help. And the cop says, I'm not your effing taxi driver. And I said, okay, I know you're not my taxi driver, but my wife, my girlfriend, needs help. And the cop says something into the mic, his walkie-talkie, reaches over, puts on his hat, and steps out of the car. No less than 20 seconds later, two cops pull up, two cop cars pull up, and they pull their guns on me and my wife. I'm in a tuxedo, she's in a gown. I'm sitting there wondering, what in the world just happened? All I did was just ask for help. Through the grace of God, we were in front of a shop, and the store owner, an Asian man, saw everything that happened and asked me and my wife, while with the cops having their guns on us, pulled us into a shop and literally protected us from the police. 5 minutes later, the cops pull away. And to put this in perspective for you, 5 days later, I was a starting outside linebacker for the New York Giants in a playoff game against the Philadelphia Eagles. The moral of the story is it didn't matter whether I was an inner city kid in a hoodie walking home, a teenager, or I was a professional football player in a tuxedo. All the cops saw was black, and all they saw was their guns were pointed at me. There's been a lot of protests around the country, and those protests have been about more than the brutal killings of black people that we've seen on TV. They've actually been also about the indignities that black and brown people face every day that no one ever hears about, that no one ever talks about. I've never said anything to people about this because I didn't want people to feel uncomfortable. And every minority has 20 stories like these in different circumstances that may not involve the police, but involve so many other aspects of their life. The time for silence has stopped. That time is over. It's time to voice what is happening so that people understand that this is real. It's time for our white students, our Asian students, our brown students, anyone who understands what's happening to air this so that we can all work together to make Penn State a better place.
Thank you. Thank you, Brandon. And I think it's very clear that the board has someone who's going to pay close attention and is a full partner in what we're trying to do. Clarence, I'd like to turn to you next to perhaps talk about how critically important the work of the commission is. But I think it would also be worthwhile, and Danielle, I'll ask you the same question in a minute, but I think it would be worthwhile, how do we make sure that this is different, not another commission, not another task force report? but that we use this moment to actually create profound change?
So that's the question, isn't it? And so I think it becomes important, in my view, first and foremost, to disrupt the idea of tradition. I think that Penn State, like many other universities, I think can be bound by notions of tradition, what has been done in the past. There can be a lot of institutional inertia. And so I think what becomes very important is to try and think critically, think creatively about what the university, as a point of entry, as a part of this broader community in the borough and the county, how do we create an environment, a learning, a working environment that is more equitable, that is more inclusive as well as diverse, and put aside the question of what Penn State has done over the past 25 years, so that we have conversations that don't begin and end with, well, we don't do things this way. And I think to the extent that that sort of thinking and discourse becomes a beginning point and an end point, then I think we do find ourselves, or at least we risk finding ourselves in a similar situation a decade or even 5 years from now. And so I think the point becomes to really think about what we need to do better as an institution, as a flagship university, and not move from the standpoint or proceed from the standpoint of what we believe is possible, because there are a number of things that are possible if we allow ourselves to think and talk in those ways. That's pretty abstract. I mean, I think in many ways it's about just thinking systematically about processes, about policies, about procedures, and putting aside how that might make people feel given their particular portfolio and bailiwick, but always keeping front and center the question of what needs to be done. And I would say that at this stage in the life of the commission, for me, speaking only for myself, I think that's the primary, I think, place setter or place mark, however you want to term it, from which we should begin.
Danielle?
Thank you. And to my colleague, Dean Lang, thank you for laying out that extraordinary theoretical basis. And I will say we need to invest as much in systemic anti-racist action as we invested in racist action. That's how we get after this. And we have to recognize that disruption is the key. The time for incrementalism is long gone. Disruption must be swift and deep and full of our complete attention and commitment.
Thank you. Thank you. Beth, perhaps you could describe what you're hoping that the Faculty Senate will be able to accomplish.
Thank you. Yeah, and I want to be clear that I'm going to be discussing here the work that the Senate's doing because the Commission's just beginning its work. I hope we can work together, of course. The Senate's already started working on some of these items. Some of this may happen entirely within the Senate, but some of this work's going to need the collaboration, partnering with you, President Barron, the work of the Select Commission, Dr. Whitehurst, the board to move forward well. Over the last 6 weeks, so I've been chair for 2 months, I charged the Senate committees to think about their priorities for the year by explicitly focusing on bias and racism. So far, this has generated 6 different items that I can identify that we've started to work on. The first one is I asked the Senate committees to take a deep look at assessment of teaching. At Penn State, of course, we assess teaching by both the peer review of teaching process, and student survey, the student ratings of teaching effectiveness. I invited the committees to completely rethink the manner in which we assess teaching and be mindful in the ways in which bias often infuses any instrument that we choose. It's going to be tough work here, but I really am committed to us trying to to really look at this deeply. It may mean that we completely rethink the way we assess teaching, including how these measures are used for review. But the work is just starting, so I don't want to get ahead of the work, but that's what I've asked them to do. 2, I've asked that we consider diversity training and support for faculty and staff. This has been a recommendation of the Senate in the past, and I'm re-upping this as a committee charge this year as well. 3, I've asked our policy review subcommittee to review Senate policies with an eye to identifying biases related to social and racial justice. The Senate directly controls some policies related to students in particular, and I want us to really take a deep look at those policies to make sure they're not unintended biases embedded in them. 4, I've asked the Curricular Affairs Committee to explore adding or redefining current curricular requirements for racial justice. This has been a request from student leaders over the years, and I hope that we can make some real progress on this starting this year. 5, this is a very timely one, but we're going to review the impact COVID-19 is having on our faculty and students. We're concerned that there's an impact on promotion and an impact on promotion and tenure for our faculty, and we want to see if we can identify that. And we're concerned that it may be disproportionately targeting or affecting certain faculty. We're also concerned that our most vulnerable students are impacted more severely by a shift to remote learning and instruction, and just the dislocations that are going on right now with COVID more generally. And so several committees are looking at different aspects of that. Lastly, our committees are very supportive of the upcoming work of the Student Code of Conduct Task Force. So that's something we're very interested in as well. These are just a few of the concrete areas we're already working on in the Senate. The Senate's a great forum for us to discuss ideas, including, of course, policies as well as expectations. I'm really happy to be working with you, President Barron and Dr. Whitehurst, you as well, Brandon, and the Board of Trustees, and I look forward to the work of the Select Commission as well.
Thank you, Beth. Brandon, perhaps you could describe what types of actions, activities, what's being contemplated at the board level to address systemic racism?
Well, all the change that we've seen around the country and at Penn State has been heartening. It's encouraging to see this movement of people coming out and speaking out for social justice. But one of the concerns is that over time, that this will fade. And what we are contemplating on the board is sort of changing the structure of the board so that we have a standing committee that will be able to address issues of diversity and inclusion sort of on a long-term basis. So we're looking at like changing our bylaws and changing the board structure to have a committee that will address issues of human resources and educational equity. And it falls, any issue of discrimination or any issue of bias can fall under this group, where we would work with you, President Barron, and Dr. Whitehurst, and making sure that you have the resources that you need in order to make Penn State a better place. Another issue that we are looking to address is the lack of diversity on the board. You know, we recognize that this is a problem, and we've been contemplating action on this. And you know, there are currently 2 Latinos, 1 Asian American, and 1 African American of 36 members of our board. And we recognize that has to change. And what we're looking to do, and this is still a work in progress, is set a percentage of our board that will be diverse, and set a date by which we will achieve that. Now, this is still in committee and we're still debating, but this is the framework and what we want to present to the university, that we are going to be X% diverse by this date. And so it's a way to hold us all accountable to those points. Amongst other changes that we're considering, as Beth mentioned, that that implicit bias is everywhere, and that training is of the utmost importance. And given that through Beth's leadership, your leadership, President Barron and Marcus, you're contemplating these things. We're also contemplating having implicit bias training at a board level, and to have it not be a one-off, but something that we do consistently at a minimum on an annual basis. There are so many other potential changes that are out there, and I just wanted to echo Clarence and Danielle's point is that we can't think inside the box. We have to be open for change. And the Penn State community has such a large and deep community that has so many ideas that we're just open to hear ideas from the faculty, the alumni, and the students on how we can improve.
Well, thank you, Brandon. Brandon, perhaps you could also talk about how you see the board interacting with the Select Commission and the other steps that we're taking.
Yeah. I guess the key point in any institution is sort of communication and to be able to exchange ideas. And I want to build a rapport with the members of all the committees where they can reach out sort of directly to me if they have any issues or concerns. And I'm sure I speak for the rest of my committee is that door will be open as well. We plan to get sort of regular updates from you, President Barron, about what's happening with your initiative and report those up to the board. And in those regular briefings, we plan to talk about the timing, where we stand in terms of completing each of the objectives, understanding whether you have the financial resources you need, you have the human capital that you need. Are there any political barriers that are in this big bureaucracy of Penn State that the board can support you with? Are we communicating properly with our external factors? So working with Lawrence and making sure we're communicating to our constituency, our alumni, that what we're doing and taking ideas from them. Are we working with each other sort of internally, and are we pulling the right people, leveraging the resources that we have in order to bring about a positive outcome? I also want to take a minute to talk about sort of accountability and my views on it. So the key drivers are trying to increase the number of students and the number of faculty that are diverse. And I understand that these issues are extremely challenging because I've worked with you, President Barron, and Dr. Whitehurst on trying to solve these problems for 2 years. But as Danielle and Clarence mentioned, we have to think outside of the box. We can't do the same thing and expect different results. So I'm looking forward to working with you and working with the members of our committee and the members of our panel, taking the recommendations and not being afraid to try something new. It's okay if we move a little bit in the wrong direction because we always have the right to course correct. But by working together, we can make a positive change because the status quo is not acceptable.
Thank you. Thank you. Marcus, perhaps you could also give a description of the upcoming roundtables that you have planned.
Yes. So in collaboration with the Penn State Alumni Association, Development and Alumni Relations, WPSU, and the Office of Educational Equity, tomorrow will be the first of our 3-part roundtable series titled Toward Racial Equity at Penn State, Social Difference, Social Equity, and Social Change. The second roundtable is scheduled for September 8th at 6 p.m. And the third one is scheduled for November 5th, also at 6 p.m. And November 5th will be 2 days after Election Day. So this series is meant to be current, to dig a little deeper into uncomfortable conversations, and to explore commonalities and ways to improve issues with racial equity. Tomorrow's roundtable will focus on race, our campus climate and workplace, It will be a conversation with Penn State's new Black leadership. The roundtable participants will include 3 of our new deans. 2 of them are here with us this afternoon, Danielle, Dean of Dickinson Law, as well as Clarence, the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts, and Steve Carpenter, Dean of the College of Arts and Architecture, and our president of the Penn State Alumni Association will round out the roundtable, Randy Houston. So we encourage everyone to join us tomorrow at 3 p.m. And you will certainly be in for an engaging conversation about racial equity. Thank you.
And this is a 3-part series, correct?
That's correct.
And when will the next ones be?
The second one will be September 8th at 6 p.m. and the third will be November 5th, also at 6 p.m.
Well, thank you. I hope all of you will please join us and participate in those community roundtables. I know that that they will offer a number of great thoughts and ideas. I just want to say here in closing that as a university and a university leadership, I really believe that this is a profound moment, and we have to make sure that we take this moment and take the action steps that we need to do to make sure that we have a significant impact on systemic racism. We're listening, and that's because we recognize that we don't have all of the answers, and I'm so pleased that we have a group of co-chairs and on the other groups that care deeply and have personal perspective here that will make sure that we take the steps that we need to create significant change. There's some things that we can do that I believe we can respond quickly to. There are other things that will take some time because what we're looking for is a lasting impact. To take this moment in time, what I believe is a historic moment in time, and make sure that we're changing Penn State and we're changing the world around us. I look forward to your input. We can't do this without the community, and I look forward to the opportunities to partner with you as we move forward. Thank you.